few years ago, I was on a trail run after a good snow. I decided to do about 20 miles in the opposite direction of where I would usually run, and this took me to a section of the trail I'd never seen before. The trail runs on top of a levee that is surrounded by flat farmland on one side and a river on the other. Then it turns right into a small semicircle-shaped wooded area with tons of skinny trees. While the trees are packed in, you can pretty much see all the way through them. There was a clearing at one spot with a random bench facing the river. It struck me as beautiful, so I stopped for a few minutes to admire the view and snap a picture before running on. On my way back, I glanced at the spot again and decided I wanted to take a picture of the spot once every season. I made the trek in the spring, a few times in the summer, and then twice in the fall. I wasn't happy with the original fall picture I took, so I went back a few weeks later when the leaf colors looked a little bit better. The second fall trip was the last time I've ever gone. Everything was normal as I ran into the clearing by the bench and pulled out my phone. I tried to frame the picture so that it would be in the same shot, and then everything felt wrong. My heart started pounding, my hair stood up, my spine tingled. It was the worst fear I'd ever felt. I started fumbling around with my phone, trying to put it back in my armband. It felt like someone was in the woods behind me watching me, but they weren't just watching me. I was being sized up, thought about, possibly chosen. It was dangerous. It felt like whoever was watching me wanted to hurt me or snatch me. I turned around and scanned the entire area surrounding the bench, waiting to see some drug-addicted murderer pop out of the camouflaged area. Like I said, you could see clear through the trees. No one was there. In fact, everything was dead quiet. I hadn't noticed that everything was abnormally silent. I stood there staring and scanning, waiting to see anything because my feeling felt so strong. I don't know why, but I strongly felt like if I just booked it, this person or thing would be triggered, but I needed to leave right then. I tried to swallow every ounce of terror I felt, pretend like everything was normal, and ran at a medium pace back towards the levee. Once I was in the open of the levee, I took off. But here's the weirder part. I felt like I wasn't out of danger yet. My spine kept tingling, like something was behind me, and I needed to keep pushing forward as fast as I could. I know this sounds crazy, but I didn't feel like it was a person anymore, and it could pop up at any moment and snatch me, even though I was getting further away. I kept thinking it wanted to snatch me. I normally don't use that word, but that is the word that specifically popped into my mind. It wasn't until I was about 2 miles away that I felt like I was out of its zone and I was safe. It took me a long time to calm down after I got in my car and went home. I truly felt like I was in danger. Every year, my friends and I go on a week-long canoe trip in Algonquin Park, usually to drink and fish. This past summer, we had decided to stay on Tom Thompson Lake, if you know it, for our main site, which ended up being an island in the middle of the lake. There were 6 of us in total, with one group of 4 in a large tent, one guy in a solo tent, and myself in a hammock between them. One night, we had been huddled around the fire at about 1 a.m., when we noticed a flare in the sky over what we assumed was an adjacent lake. We didn't think much of it until an awful scream came across the lake about 20 minutes later. I was the only one left sober at this time, and there wasn't much we could do, so we assumed it was the problem bear in the area that we'd been warned of at the outfitters. The strange part came after everybody had gone to bed. At 4 a.m., the other 5 guys went into their tents and passed out, while I lay in a hammock listening to them fall asleep. For reference, the group of 4 were about 30 feet to my right, and the other guy about 100 feet to my left on the far shore. As I watched the stars and tried to will myself to sleep, I noticed everything had gone incredibly silent. Suddenly feeling creeped out, I slowed my breathing and stayed as still as I could, thinking about the possible bear and how I was a neatly wrapped meat sack hanging there. Then I heard a voice call out about 20 feet to my left by the remains of our fire. It was the voice of my friend Seamus, who was one of the guys passed out in the large tent. 4 hellos, with each one sounding more emotionless.
Hello? 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 Hello?
All said within maybe 6 seconds. Although I immediately recognized the voice, every instinct I had was on alert, telling me not to respond. I stayed as quiet as a corpse for the next 5 minutes, listening for any movement until I felt the tension leave the air. It disturbed me a lot to know how normally you can hear every movement on the site, and yet I heard absolutely nothing. The next morning, everyone told me that they'd heard nothing, but we agreed to move sites early since we'd all gotten an eerie vibe from that night. This was our 6th trip to Algonquin, and we never had any creepy experiences before. I hope that what I heard that night was a camper with an identical voice to my friends who had come to see if the site was free, or Seamus had somehow stealthily sleptwalk out of his tent, but neither seems possible. I 100% would have heard them moving. Anyways, I can only hope nothing happens on future trips, but it will be hard to forget the fear of this event. This took place last year at the beginning of summer. I was with my mom, headed down to my Nana's farm to visit for a weekend. For some context, she lives on a farm way back in the country, right at the foot of a mountain in rural South Carolina. It's a very rural and secluded area, so the roads are badly maintained and barely wide enough for 2 cars to pass one another. The houses are also spread out and set far back into the tree line from the road, so there's very little ambient light besides the headlights of a car. So my mom and I are driving along, her in the driver's seat and me in the passengers. It was around 11 p.m., and we're 15 minutes out from Nana's, deep in the woods, with the radio down almost to silent. We come onto this straight stretch of the road in a heavily wooded area, and suddenly this blur of a creature darts out in the road, right at the edge of our headlights. It was moving pretty good, but both me and my mom were able to get a good look at it, and both agree on what we saw. It was a fairly large creature, roughly the size of a person, or bigger. Neither of us could make out the head, but we both remember it appearing to have a segmented body, my mom's words, as if it were emaciated, and its ribcage was poking out. The reflection of light made it hard for me to tell color, but my mom said she remembered it to be dark, and she didn't see fur or hair. It had long limbs, and as it moved across the road, it didn't run the way a dog or horse would, with all 4 legs. The best word to describe it would be loping, using its front limbs to pull itself along, and it was moving considerably fast. We both said something along the lines of, "What the hell is that?" as it crossed in front of us. As we got up to where it had crossed, I turned to look as it just reached the other side of the road and out of our headlights, and I swear on my life, it stood up and ran. Not like a dog rearing on its hind legs. It was definitely bipedal. I immediately yelled that it stood up, and we both started getting nervous. I honestly would have thought I was going insane had I not had another person in the car with me. My mom has always been a pretty level-headed person and not superstitious, but she was very nervous and made me agree not to tell my Nana about it to avoid scaring her, which made me recognize how serious this was. I should also mention that there had apparently been a series of attacks on livestock and horses in the area around the time this happened. People were saying that they found wire fences ripped through and their animals attacked. I don't think any died, but if I remember correctly, there were a few horses that were severely wounded. There have been a few other strange incidences in the area, but that was my personal experience. The story takes place in 2014 in the northern part of rural South Carolina. I'm absolutely sure where it happened. I drove this route many times during that year. Very dark, very rural, and this particular stretch of road doesn't have many houses. This incident happened not far from an old church also. No idea if relevant. I used to work at a tattoo shop and lived with the owner. Our route home took us through the area described above. We usually get home fairly late. This night wasn't any different. In fairness, I will say I had smoked some pot earlier, but I'm a heavy smoker and it doesn't affect me horribly. and I don't think the passenger had done any drugs or drank anything that day. We're driving home. I'm probably driving about 60 to 70. Didn't like to go too fast because deer and wild hogs scared me quite often. We're talking about something, no idea what. I'm slightly glancing over to the right during the conversation, as one does while driving. I notice something that seems to be running at the woods. Not unusual. I often saw shit at the sides. However, I realized that it was still there at a second glance, which causes me to look and see what in the world seems to be still moving beside a speeding vehicle. As I turn my head to look, this form, which I can only describe as a very vague shape of a four-legged wolf-looking creature, but without any definition, runs ahead of the car, goes across the road, and into the woods. As it crosses the road and my high beam shone on it, it seemed to absorb the light. No visible fur, no reflection in the eyes, nothing discernible beyond a sort of wolf-shaped blur that was the literal darkest black I've ever seen. This all happened in the span of maybe 5 or 6 seconds, I'd guess. It startled me quite a bit, so I immediately say, "What the fuck was that?" "What did you see?" I reply with the above description, to which my friend goes very quiet and only says to tell his wife what I told him when we got home. I tell her, her face drops, and she immediately looks shocked. Then they tell me that my friend had seen it before with someone else, who denied seeing it. Same area, same description, and he saw it too that night I saw it. Same exact thing. I've looked online. I've read the local Carolina Legends books. I've asked so many old people if they had any idea what it was, and I can't find anything very convincing. There was one story on Reddit where someone mentioned a similar entity, described also as being a void black. Besides that, we are still stumped. One guy said it was maybe like a forest spirit or something. It doesn't fit any black dog things I've read. If anyone here has any ideas, please let me know. We've all moved away now, but I still think about it all the time, and I still have half a mind to go try and see it again. I just really want to know what we saw.